You're not lost. You're just forcing what's not ready. You're not broken, you're not behind, you're not forgotten. But you are trying to bloom in soil that hasn't thawed yet. And the more you force it, the more it slips. The more you rush it, the more the ground beneath you cracks. The more you try to push your way through life with clenched fists, the more the universe makes you wait. Not because it's cruel, but because it's wise. Because it knows something you forgot in your desperation to arrive. Timing is not a technicality. It's a test of faith. We were not meant to be ready all at once. Not meant to carry vision that isn't ours yet. Not meant to speed through seasons of becoming like there's a finish line for identity. But we were taught to panic in the pause. We were taught to fear stillness, to mistake not knowing for failing, to interpret delay as denial. So we hustle, we grind, we force, we pretend. We try to make sense of the fog by sprinting through it. But clarity doesn't come from speed. It comes from stillness, from standing in the unknown and not flinching, from breathing in the ambiguity and saying this too is sacred. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. But we rarely slow down enough to meet our unconscious face to face. We call confusion a crisis. We call not having it all together weakness. We force smiles through anxiety. We fake certainty through chaos. We chase clarity, not realizing it's something that emerges, never something we earn by pressure. You're not lost. You're just being initiated into a depth that cannot be explained, into an alignment that cannot be strategized, into a version of you that isn't built through control, but through surrender. And surrender is not passive. It is not weakness. It is the ultimate act of trust. Trusting your path, trusting your process, trusting that what is for you doesn't require desperation, it requires presence. But presence requires a death of the false self. The self who needs to prove, the self who needs applause, the self who cannot sit with emptiness without numbing it, the self who confuses doing with becoming, the self who wears productivity as protection from their own silence. This is the self that panics when life gets quiet, when results don't come, when the plan doesn't play out. This is the self that forces, that grabs, that begs the universe for what can only arrive through patience and alignment. But that self must die, because the real you, the one buried beneath your strategies and shoulds and timelines, does not force. It listens, it waits, it trusts, not in passivity, but in precision, because there is a deeper intelligence at work in your life, something beyond algorithms and goal setting, something older than ambition, something sacred, and it does not move by deadlines. It moves by readiness, and readiness cannot be faked. You can't fake healing. You can't fake wholeness. You can't fake alignment with forced effort. The river doesn't rush to meet the ocean. The seed doesn't rip itself open to become a tree. The stars don't hurry their birth through fire. And yet you expect yourself to be fully formed, fully clear, fully ready now. You expect to make every decision from a place of certainty, when the truth is, most transformation begins in confusion, in discomfort, in doubt, in the dark. It begins where you feel most unprepared. But that's the point. Growth doesn't ask if you're ready. It asks if you're willing to sit with the ache of not knowing, willing to hold your potential in the palm of your hand and not exploit it for short-term comfort, willing to stay rooted when everything in you wants to run, willing to trust that the delay is not punishment, it's preparation. Because readiness isn't about arrival, it's about embodiment. It's not about when the opportunity comes, it's about who you are when it does. And if you're forcing, you're not ready, because force is the language of fear. But presence speaks the language of power. It doesn't need to convince, it doesn't need to beg. It simply waits, not passively, but faithfully, like a lion in the tall grass, like a queen in her knowing, like an oak in the wind, bending, never breaking. You are not behind. You are not lost. You are being refined by the waiting. You are being strengthened by the stillness. You are being forged in a silence too holy for noise. So stop forcing, stop clawing at the walls of your becoming. Stop treating your timeline like a competition, and start listening to what aches, to what whispers, to what resists being rushed. There's something sacred there, and it's waiting for you to stop so it can finally begin. Because the becoming cannot speak over your panic. It waits beneath your noise. It waits for you to breathe without expectation, to look into the void without flinching, to say, I trust even when I can't trace it. But we weren't taught to trust. We were taught to chase, taught to quantify worth by productivity, to measure progress in milestones, to validate identity through achievement. So now, when life slows down, we spiral. We diagnose our pace as failure. We call our slowness shame. But the soul doesn't move on clocks. It moves in cycles, in spirals, in seasons that can't be hacked or bypassed or optimized. And when you try to cheat the season, when you force what isn't ready, you break your own rhythm. You lose your own timing. You dance to someone else's music and wonder why your steps feel clumsy. But alignment has its own tempo, and it demands silence to be heard. So sit with the stillness. Sit with the mess. Sit with the version of you that doesn't have it figured out, that doesn't know where it's going, that is tempted every day to run back into performance. Sit with the ache, not to analyze it, but to honor it. Because behind the ache is a truth your busyness has buried. You're not behind, you're becoming. And becoming is brutal. It's dismantling. It's the sacred unraveling of every identity that was built to please, to perform, to survive. It's a shedding of skins that no longer fit. The ego will scream. It will panic. It will tell you that if you slow down, you lose everything. It will tell you that if you don't force it, someone else will take it. But that voice is not your intuition. That voice is fear, pretending to be wisdom. Your intuition knows the truth. It speaks in stillness. It says, you're not missing anything. You're not too late. You're just in the womb of your next becoming. You're gestating a new self, a new life, a new frequency. And birth is not a process you can rush. Try to force it, and you will rupture what was meant to rise. Try to push through, and you'll carry trauma instead of wisdom. Let the season shape you. Let the waiting strip you. Let the stillness burn what's not real. And don't call it delay. Call it initiation, because that's what it island. An initiation into sovereignty, into inner authority, into a you that no longer begs for permission. A you that doesn't force, because force is rooted in fear, and fear is rooted in the belief that you are not enough. But what if you are? Not when you get there, not when you arrive, not when the plan unfolds, but now. What if the real reason life hasn't moved the way you wanted is because the next level of your life requires a version of you who doesn't panic in the pause, a version of you who doesn't flinch when nothing makes sense, a version of you who has made peace with being a mystery, even to yourself. This is the wisdom of the wilderness, the magic of not knowing, the holy tension of being in between. And if you can hold that, if you can let the waiting work you, let the darkness deepen you, let the not knowing stretch your trust, what you create from that place will not just be success. It will be sacred, because it will not be built from force. It will be born from alignment. And anything born from alignment carries a different frequency. It doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. It hums quietly, steadily, like truth, like thunder in the distance, like something ancient waking up inside you and remembering its name. This is where your real life begins, not when everything makes sense, not when you've perfected the plan, but when you stop trying to outperform your own soul, because you're not behind. You're in rhythm with something deeper than you can see. And the very pain you're trying to fix, The confusion you're rushing to escape. The moment you're so desperate to leave, this is the forge. This is the becoming. This is where the old you dies and the true you learns to breathe. But only if you stop forcing. Because when you force, you disconnect from the moment, from your intuition, from the deeper timeline life is trying to offer you. When you force, you miss the nuance. You miss the lesson. You miss the version of you that only emerges in the pressure of waiting, not the pressure of proving. So stop proving. You don't need to prove your worth by fixing what isn't broken. You don't need to prove your value by rushing to some imaginary finish line. You don't need to convince the world you're doing enough just to feel enough, because you are enough. And enoughness doesn't mean perfection. It means presence. It means standing in the center of the storm without becoming it. It means holding the silence without reaching for noise. It means saying, I don't know where this leads, but I trust who I am while I walk through it. Because that's the only thing that was ever real. Not the outcome, not the plan, not the version of success that's been marketed to your nervous system since birth. The real thing, the only thing, is who you are when everything else is stripped away. Who you are when you stop performing. Who you are when you stop running. Who you are when you stop forcing. And that version of you, the one you meet in the waiting, is the one the world needs. Not the polished one, not the perfect one, the present one, the grounded one. The one who doesn't flinch when life says, not yet. Because that not yet is not rejection. It's protection. It's redirection. It's preparation. It's sacred timing telling you, you are not lost. You are not late. You are simply in the space between what was and what will be. Don't force this. Feel this. Let it shape you. Let it undo you. Let it build something deeper than a result. Let it build you. Because once you emerge, once you stop forcing what's not ready, you won't just be ready for the next thing. You'll become the next thing. You'll become the embodiment of patience turned into power. Not the frantic kind of power built on urgency and scarcity, but the rooted kind. The kind that doesn't chase because it attracts. The kind that doesn't scream because its presence already speaks. The kind that walks into rooms without needing to explain itself because it no longer doubts its place. You'll become the storm and the calm, the fire and the stillness, the paradox that no longer needs to make sense to be real. Because once you stop forcing, you learn the truth, that the universe doesn't respond to desperation, it responds to alignment. And alignment doesn't look like constant action, it looks like clarity. It looks like knowing. It looks like being so fully anchored in yourself that you can finally hear the whisper behind the noise. You are exactly where you need to be. No moment wasted. No path meaningless. Even your detours were divine. Even your delays were sacred. Even the seasons where nothing made sense were sculpting you into someone who no longer panics in silence, who no longer chases for validation, who no longer begs for a door to open when it was never your door in the first place. This is power. The kind of power no one can give you and no one can take. The kind born in the stillness most people avoid. Because when you stop forcing, you become sovereign. You become spacious. You become unshakable. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because you are no longer trying to control it. You're flowing with it, responding to it, partnering with it. And that partnership is where the magic happens. It's where clarity meets surrender, where vision meets patience, where purpose stops being a concept and becomes your compass, where you stop needing to find your path because you become it. With every breath, with every choice not made from fear, with every boundary you uphold not to push people away, but to protect your peace. With every time you choose rest without guilt, with every time you sit in the unknown without rushing for resolution, with every time you say, not yet, and that's okay. Because not yet doesn't mean never. It means your roots are still deepening. Your soil is still nourishing. Your spirit is still aligning. And when it's time, you won't need to force anything. It will arrive because you arrived first. You met yourself in the waiting. You found strength in the pause. You stopped searching for permission to be whole and realized you already were. You're not lost. You never were. You were just forcing what was still finding its way to you. Now let it come, in its time, on its terms, and when it does, you'll be ready. Not because you forced it, but because you finally became it. And when you become it, when you embody the very thing you were chasing, you won't feel fireworks. You won't feel a parade. You won't hear a voice from the heavens congratulating you. You feel quiet, a silence so profound it humbles you, a calm so steady it replaces your need for answers, a stillness so alive it makes you question how you ever mistook chaos for passion. This is what true arrival feels like, not noise, but knowing, not intensity, but integrity, not perfection, but peace. And it won't look like what you imagined, because what you imagined was shaped by urgency. What you expected was filtered through someone else's timeline. What you wanted was designed by the version of you who hadn't yet met this level of self. But what you receive now, what you allow now, will be different. It will be slower, but deeper, simpler, but richer, quieter, but more powerful than anything you've ever forced into being. Because it won't be born from need, it will be born from presence. And presence changes everything. It doesn't just change what you attract, it changes what you allow to stay. You stop tolerating things that used to tempt you. You stop reaching for hands that once felt like home but held too much fire. You stop explaining yourself to people who only ever listen to argue. You stop shrinking in rooms you were born to lead. Because now you know. Your power isn't in your effort, it's in your essence. And essence can't be faked. It can't be outsourced. It can't be forced. It has to be remembered. And that remembrance, that homecoming, is the whole point of the waiting, the point of the pause, the purpose behind the plan that didn't unfold the way you wanted it to. You weren't being punished. You were being prepared. Prepared to hold what doesn't collapse under the weight of pressure. Prepared to embody a life that doesn't require escape. Prepared to carry a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. Prepared to lead without ego. To love without fear. To move without doubt. You are not the same person who once begged the world to see them. You are not the same soul who once called confusion failure. You are not the same energy that once forced timelines out of fear of missing your moment. Because now you know there is no missed moment when you are the moment. You are the timing. You are the alignment. You are the clarity you've been praying for. And it's all here. Not because you forced it, but because you finally let go of the belief that you had to. Now walk forward. Not with urgency, not with fear, but with reverence, because everything ahead of you is already aligning, and it's not waiting for the most desperate version of you. It's waiting for the one who trusts, who rests, who listens, who lets it come. And when it comes, you recognize it because you'll finally be aligned with you. And when you're aligned with yourself, truly, deeply, immovably aligned, you stop looking for signs. You become the sign, the confirmation, the evidence. You no longer wait for the world to tell you who you are. You walk into rooms and remind it, not with arrogance, not with loudness, but with that unshakable stillness that only comes from facing the void and surviving the silence. That inner calm that says, I've sat with myself in the dark. There is nothing left to fear. Because the person who can sit with their own uncertainty and not panic, that person cannot be manipulated. That person cannot be rushed. That person cannot be baited into desperation because they are no longer seduced by the illusion of urgency. They know that anything truly meant for them cannot be missed, and anything that must be forced was never theirs. You see, most people live as fugitives from themselves, running from silence, running from slowness, running from the wisdom that only whispers when the noise dies down. But not you, not anymore. You chose a different path, the harder one, the quieter one. You chose to stop, to listen, to unlearn, to not perform in the pause, but become in it. And that choice, that sacred, sovereign, terrifying choice, that's what changed your fate. Because your destiny doesn't unfold through force. It unfolds through frequency. And your frequency only shifts when your beliefs do. When your beliefs about delay, about waiting, about worth, about time die. When you no longer see stillness as a threat. When you no longer see not yet as rejection. When you no longer see your own unfolding as something that needs to be defended or explained. This is the frequency of trust. And trust isn't blind. It's built. It's built every time you don't chase what's pulling away. Every time you sit in discomfort without fixing it. Every time you feel the fear rise and say, I will not abandon myself to soothe you. And that builds something no timeline ever could. Self-respect. Because once you respect yourself enough to stop forcing, the world begins to reflect that respect back to you. It shows up in the way doors open, in the way opportunities fit, in the way people treat you, not because they've changed, but because you have. You no longer vibrate at the frequency of chasing. You vibrate at the frequency of choosing. And that energy, that quiet, radiant, anchored energy, that's the energy that bends reality. Not effort, not force, not hustle. Frequency. And your frequency is no longer frantic. It's divine. It's patient. It's exact. Because you finally remembered. Nothing real can be rushed. Nothing sacred needs to be forced. And you were never lost. You were simply being refined in the fire of what wasn't ready. And now you are. Now you are ready, not because everything around you is perfect, not because the stars aligned in textbook formation, not because the world finally applauded you, but because you've aligned within. You've done the inner architecture. You've laid the foundation of stillness. And from that stillness, a new kind of movement emerges. Not reactive, not erratic, but intentional, deliberate, clean. This is what it means to move from power, not pressure. You speak less, but your words land deeper. You act less often, but with greater impact. You're no longer scattered in 100 directions trying to prove your momentum. You're a force, not because you're fast, but because you're clear. And clarity changes everything. Clarity kills doubt. Clarity silences anxiety. Clarity removes the need for comparison. Because once you know who you are, and more importantly, who you're not, you no longer need to consult the world before taking the next step. You don't need validation when you're rooted in truth. You don't need signs when you're synced with your own signal. You don't need a finish line to feel like you've won. Because the old self that used to need those things, it's gone. Burned in the fire of all the forcing. Buried under the ashes of every version of you that thought they had to earn rest, earn peace, earn love. You are no longer negotiating with life from a place of lack. You are no longer hustling for what alignment will bring you in stillness. You are no longer playing chess with the divine, thinking your intellect can outmaneuver your destiny. Because you've seen the truth. The only thing that ever stood between you and everything you were asking for was your refusal to wait. Your unwillingness to trust, your addiction to urgency. But now you're sovereign. And sovereignty looks like this. You don't chase timelines. You trust rhythms. You don't argue with reality. You respond to it with grace. You don't force the blooming. You tend the soil. You water the roots. You let go of control not because you gave up, but because you finally understood you never needed it. All you needed was to stop, to breathe, to surrender, to let the storm pass, without becoming it. And now that you have, you see clearly. You see that you were never lost. You were just early. Early to a vision not yet ripe. Early to a season still unfolding. Early to a lesson still rooting. And now the ripening begins, not with thunder, but with presence. Not with noise, but with gravity. Because you're no longer chasing the world. The world begins to turn toward you. Not because you shouted louder, but because your silence became undeniable. Your stillness became magnetic. Your restraint became sacred. And your life becomes a mirror of your trust. It flows. It opens. It responds. Because you stopped forcing what wasn't ready. And you became what always was. And what always was you. Not the version masked by need. Not the silhouette shaped by pressure. Not the echo of other people's expectations. But the real you. The one born before the noise. Before the striving. Before the world told you that you had to be more, do more, prove more, just to be seen. You've come home now, and it doesn't roar, it whispers. It doesn't flash, it glows. It doesn't beg, it chooses. You don't walk into rooms to be recognized anymore. You walk in already knowing. Because when you stop forcing, you don't just get what you wanted. You discover you were the source all along. You become your own ground, your own signal, your own sanctuary. And that kind of power, it doesn't need to arrive. It just awakens. So no, you're not lost. You never were. You were simply being held, shaped, hollowed, not punished but prepared, not late but divinely aligned, not behind, but walking a path that couldn't be rushed, because it was building something eternal in you, a knowing, a clarity, a calm that doesn't flinch, even when the world does. This is the miracle of not forcing. This is the revelation inside the waiting. And now, as the silence softens into movement, you don't rise because it's time. You rise because you are time. You are the moment. You are the one, and nothing will ever be the same again. You're not tired. You're just forcing what's not meant. Not broken. Just misaligned. Your exhaustion is not evidence of how strong you've been. It's proof of how much you're pretending the wrong things are yours to carry. Because when the soul is being asked to hold what doesn't belong, every cell screams, every night drags, every effort becomes heavy, and you believe you're the failing party, not the system you're forcing. Carl Jung said that individuation demands truth. The courage to stand apart from the roles and narratives that shaped you so deeply you forgot who initiated them. But what if the fatigue you feel right now is the tension between your truth and the version of you you keep performing? You're tired because you're trying to occupy a space that never shaped you. You're tired because you're pushing a story meant to end. You're tired because you're feeding ghosts long after they stopped haunting. This is syphoria, the deep psychological exhaustion of trying to animate what's dead. You think rest is earned between the bumps. But the real rest, the deep rest, begins when you stop cultivating fields meant for fallow. When you stop forcing what's not yours. Not through weakness, but through radical recalibration. When you stop treating destiny like a goal and start treating it like a frequency. When you stop chasing doors and start opening the one inside you. You're not behind. You're just in the wrong race. And the more you sprint, the more fatigued the body becomes. Because force breeds friction. The mind overheats. Decisions fracture. Clarity feels like a mirage. You've mistaken pressure for purpose. You've believed hustle equals honor. You've equated struggle with strength. But struggle without alignment is just spiritual sabotage. Because the forceful version of you runs on borrowed power, everyone else's timelines, their applause, their standards. The aligned version of you runs on your own resonance, your own signal. And that signal doesn't need volume to be noticed. It hums, it draws, it thrives, it allows. But force does not allow. Force commands. Commands control. Commands collapse. You're exhausted because you're trying to command your own becoming. But your becoming isn't going to be scripted. It's going to be emergent, born in stillness, forged in alignment, unfolding through surrender, not through grind. The pivot point here? Belief. You believe your efforts must always be visible to be valuable. You believe control must always be tight to feel safe. You believe movement equals momentum. But what if clarity doesn't require speed? What if peace doesn't require performance? What if the strongest version of you is layered in silence, in surrender, in the refusal to force what's not ready? Because in the pause lies your power. In the space lies your signal. In the waiting emerges your actual becoming, not the flawed version you backed into a corner, not the starved version you've been feeding scraps to, but the sovereign version you were always destined to become. Fuel that version, not with hustle, but with deep alignment, with precise boundaries, with rest, with listening, not defending, with trust, not urgency. You're not tired because you've tried everything. You're tired because you've been trying everything. Trying solves nothing. Aligning solves everything. When you fully understand this, you don't push life into alignment. You follow the alignment it offers you. You listen for where doors open naturally. You release what resists your becoming. You stop proving and start being. You stop holding on to what never belonged. You stop forcing what hasn't emerged. And you let the current carry you. That is the paradox of your rest. Not passivity, but presence. Not escape, but evolution. This is where you reclaim your flow. This is where you return to rhythm. This is where you remember. Asterisk. You're not tired. You're just forcing what's not meant. Asterisk. Right now, let your grip loosen. Let the weight fall. Not out of defeat, out of realignment. Not because you left, but because you remembered who you're becoming. In that release, everything begins again. And when it begins again, it doesn't erupt in fire. It emerges like a tide. Steady, supple, sovereign. No applause. No grand unveiling. Just truth, undeniable, unshakable truth rising from beneath the wreckage of what you no longer need to carry. Because when you stop forcing what's not meant, you stop bleeding into battles that don't deserve your energy. You stop watering deserts and calling it devotion. You stop mistaking friction for fate. And you realize some things are hard because they're yours to master. But most things are hard because they're not yours to hold. That relationship you keep fixing, not yours. That job you dread but justify, not yours. That version of you that shows up polished and exhausted, not yours. You're not tired from living. You're tired from lying to yourself, from shrinking your yes down to a maybe so you don't offend the wrong people, from packaging your intuition into a palatable pitch so the world won't call you delusional, from betraying your boundaries to preserve comfort that costs your soul. And that fatigue, that soul-deep weariness, it's not solved by sleep. It's solved by truth, radical truth. Truth that cuts, truth that frees. Truth that says, this is not mine, and I will no longer carry it. And the moment you say that, the moment you reclaim your right to rest, not collapse, but rest, you begin to wake up, not into ease, but into alignment. And alignment moves differently. It doesn't rush. It doesn't chase. It doesn't prove. It pulls. It draws. It reveals. It restores. Because the truth is, life doesn't resist you. Life resists the version of you that is not real. And you've been trying to manifest clarity from chaos, trying to architect power while avoiding truth, trying to achieve peace while clinging to pressure. But peace isn't built from pressure. It's built from precision, from honesty, from letting the wrong things die so the right things can live. So if you feel tired, ask yourself, What am I holding that no longer holds me? What am I forcing that never fed me? What am I gripping that doesn't grow me? And the answers won't come from logic. They will come from your body, from that deep inner signal that only whispers when you stop performing. And when you hear it, when you finally listen, you won't need to push anymore. You won't need to carry the weight of what's not meant. You'll walk lighter. You'll breathe deeper. You'll stand in a room and need nothing, not because you're detached, but because you are aligned. And in that alignment, the world bends, not to your control, but to your clarity. Because clarity bends reality in ways control never could. Clarity cuts through the fog that force creates. It slices through illusion like a sword made of silence. And when you move from clarity, not from conditioning, you move without effort, without explanation, without needing the world's permission slip to be who you already are. And isn't that what you've been craving? Not another strategy, not another timeline to obsess over, but the peace of knowing you no longer have to pretend. The quiet liberation that comes when you no longer contort your truth to fit someone else's comfort. That is the root of your fatigue, self-betrayal on repeat. Not because you're weak, because you've been conditioned to believe that your worth is earned through exhaustion, through showing up at war with yourself and calling it growth, through carrying the expectations of people who would rather see you shrink than see you shine. But clarity, it doesn't negotiate with those stories. It doesn't beg for belonging. It creates space. It empties what was forced so you can receive what's meant. And what's meant? It won't require you to fracture your soul to make it fit. It won't leave you anxious when you're alone. It won't make you question whether you're too much or not enough. What's meant will feel like breath, not a performance. It will feel like coming home not just to a purpose, but to a presence. To you, unmasked, unrushed, uncompromised. And in that space, you'll remember something ancient. You don't need to earn rest. You don't need to grind your way into grace. You don't need to force your future to arrive early. You just need to align. And alignment is not a reward for burnout. It's the alternative to it. It's what happens when you stop resisting the pull of what's calling you simply because it doesn't come with a blueprint or a job title or guaranteed applause. It's what happens when you choose truth over tradition, when you stop chasing and start allowing. Because anything real, anything meant doesn't need to be forced. It only needs you to be ready. And readiness isn't about having it all figured out. It's about being willing to let go of what's not real, willing to walk away, willing to trust the whisper instead of the scream, willing to rest without guilt, willing to say, if it's not for me, I will not force it. If it's mine, I won't have to. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. And when you choose wisdom over effort, your energy becomes sacred. Your time becomes precise. Your spirit becomes a magnet for what is actually aligned. Not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped trying to. And when you finally stop trying, something incredible happens. You don't collapse. You rise. Not in the way you've been taught to rise, not through tension, not through strategy, not through domination, but through truth. You rise because you're no longer carrying what isn't yours. You rise because you stopped feeding the fiction that your value lives in your struggle. You rise because you let the mask fall and discovered you didn't disappear, you finally appeared. And what appeared was not broken. It was not small. It was not behind. It was ready. Ready to meet life on its own terms. Ready to walk away from what doesn't see you. Ready to stop managing impressions and start embodying essence. Ready to rest without justification. Because rest is no longer a retreat from exhaustion, it's a return to alignment. And alignment, once chosen, begins to touch every part of your life. You speak differently, not louder, but truer. You show up differently, not to impress, but to express. You let people misunderstand you without chasing their approval because your clarity no longer depends on their comprehension. You let timing breathe. You let doors close without needing to jam your foot inside them. You stop asking, how can I make this work? And start asking, is this meant for me at all? And in that question, there is freedom. There is power. There is a deep cellular knowing that whatever you're forcing is already breaking you, and whatever is real will never need to be forced. You don't need to exhaust yourself to deserve joy. You don't need to abandon yourself to keep love. You don't need to manufacture meaning in places that drain you. You only need to return. Return to the breath. Return to the moment. Return to the self that doesn't hustle for visibility, but moves in silence with conviction. Because when you stop forcing what's not meant, you're no longer at war with your own life. You're no longer building a home out of people's expectations. You're no longer seeking permission to rest, to heal, to be seen in your full form. You give it to yourself. And that self, it doesn't need to prove anymore. It doesn't need to chase anymore. It doesn't need to force what never belonged. Because it finally remembers you were never tired from the work. You were tired from the misalignment. And now you are aligned. You are clear. You are free. Free not in the sense of running wild, but in the deeper way. In the way that means you no longer betray yourself to be understood. In the way that means you can stand in uncertainty without collapsing into control. In the way that whispers, I no longer need to be everywhere, I just need to be here. Because presence is where your real power lives. It's not found in the illusion of momentum. It's found in the moment you stop spinning and start listening. Listening to the tension in your shoulders that says, let go. Listening to the anxiety in your breath that says, this isn't the way. Listening to the fatigue in your bones that says, stop trying to earn what is already yours. Erpin, that's the truth fatigue reveals. You've been fighting your own knowing. And now the battle is over because you're done sacrificing alignment for appearance. You're done silencing your soul so your surroundings feel comfortable. You're done editing yourself down to versions that don't scare people. Let them be scared. Let them leave. Let the doors that close stay closed. Because the more you let go of what isn't meant, the more life will deliver what is clean, calm, and without confusion. No forcing, no doubting, just a deep, grounded yes, the kind that doesn't shout. It settles. It sits in your chest like gravity, quiet, unmoving, undeniable. And from that yes, you build everything. You build your boundaries not out of fear, but out of honor. You build your schedule not out of panic, but out of precision. You build your relationships not out of lack, but out of overflow. Because when you're no longer forcing what isn't meant, you have room. Room to receive, room to rest, room to breathe without apologizing for it. And in that breath, your true life begins. The life that doesn't require suffering to feel meaningful. The life that doesn't wear you down just to validate your existence. The life that feels like truth in motion. That's the life alignment brings. And now that you've tasted it, you will never settle for force again. You will never confuse exhaustion for devotion again. You will never believe that your spirit was made to be managed, squeezed, or sold. You will know deep in your bones that anything you have to force to keep will cost you yourself. And you will never pay that price again. Not now. Not ever. Because you finally remember. Asterisk, you're not tired. You were just forcing what was never meant. Asterisk. And now you've let go. And now you are free. And in that freedom, you begin to see the world differently. Not through the lens of survival. Not through the lens of urgency, but through the lens of sovereignty. You begin to understand that the things meant for you, the people, the paths, the opportunities, they won't require you to fracture your spirit to receive them. They won't ask you to dim, to rush, to beg. They'll meet you where you already are, because you finally showed up as you truly are. No masks, No roles, no endless hustling to prove what was always sacred. And now you feel it in your bones, that sacred thing, the you beneath all the layers, finally breathing, finally seen, not by others, by you. And in that moment of self-recognition, your reality begins to reshape. The noise fades, the striving silences, and what remains is truth. Simple, clear, unbending. You stop asking what's wrong with you. You start asking what's wrong with the environments that made you feel wrong for being real. You stop trying to fix what was never broken. You start releasing what doesn't resonate, and you no longer explain your clarity to people committed to misunderstanding it, because you are no longer accessible to anything that pulls you out of your peace. You are no longer available to cycles disguised as comfort. You are no longer interested in pleasing those who only applaud your performance, not your presence, because now your energy is reserved for alignment, for evolution, for truth. And that truth, it's rooted, it's silent, it's certain. And when people encounter you now, they'll sense something different, not loudness, not confidence, not charm, but peace. A peace so deep, it startles them. A peace so real, it mirrors everything they've been avoiding in themselves. And you won't need to say a word. Your existence will speak, because there's nothing louder than a soul that stopped forcing what wasn't meant and finally stood in what island. That's what you become. A signal, a mirror, a force that doesn't push. It pulls. It attracts not by striving, but by standing still in truth. And that kind of presence, that kind of peace, it doesn't chase. It doesn't beg. It becomes, and you've become it now, the tired version of you is gone. The forcing version of you is gone. What's left is real. What's left is ready. What's left is you. You, the unedited, undistorted, unburdened version. The one who no longer carries what was never theirs. The one who doesn't flinch at silence or recoil at the unknown. The one who knows that not everything needs to be solved. Some things only need to be surrendered. That version of you doesn't ask, what more can I do? They ask, what can I release? They don't ask, how can I make it work? They ask, is this even mine to carry? Because when you live in alignment, your questions change. You no longer seek answers from outside sources, you listen inward. You no longer move from pressure, you move from peace. You no longer manipulate your reality, you collaborate with it. You let life move you, not as a leaf tossed by wind, but as a wave joined to the current. And in that current, everything shifts. Time slows, decisions simplify. Nuance quiet, because you no longer mistake motion for meaning. You no longer confuse noise for necessity. You've entered the deeper rhythm, the rhythm of what's real. And in that rhythm, you only give what's true. You only say yes when your soul says it with you. You only stay where you're seen, not for your performance, but for your presence. You only rise when it's time, not when fear says so. Because now you know, real things don't have to be rushed. And nothing worth becoming will ever require you to abandon yourself in the process. This is what you've been looking for, not a new path, but a new posture. Not more effort, but more energy sovereignty. Not more answers, but more honesty. Honesty about what depletes you. Honesty about what no longer fits. Honesty about how long you've been pretending something still works when you already know it doesn't. Because the truth isn't hiding. It's been waiting for you to stop forcing, waiting for you to trust silence again, waiting for you to stop squeezing answers out of questions that were never yours to solve, waiting for you to rest not just your body, but your being. And now the waiting is over. You've returned, not to who you used to be, but to who you were before you were taught to force everything, to the version of you that doesn't hustle for worth, to the version of you that doesn't grind for belonging, to the version of you that knows if it's not meant, it won't flow. And if it flows, you won't have to force it. That is your compass now. That is your clarity. That is your calling, and you will follow it. Not with desperation, but with devotion. Devotion not to a rigid path, not to external perfection, not to someone else's map of success, but to truth, to what feels rooted, not rushed, to what feels expansive, not extracted, to what feels light in your chest instead of heavy on your back. This is the discipline of peace, the sacred practice of no longer betraying your own energy just to maintain a narrative that was never yours to begin with, because you weren't born to be a machine. You weren't born to manage the expectations of the world while abandoning the whispers of your own soul. You were born to feel, to discern, to choose with intention and release with grace. You were born to move in alignment with a rhythm so ancient it cannot be named, only remembered. And now you remember. You remember that your power was never in the hustle. It was never in the proving. It was never in how much you could hold or how long you could pretend. It was always in the pause, in the stillness, in the sacred space between effort and ease, where your clarity speaks and your soul leads. And in that space, you no longer chase timelines. You trust timing. You no longer live to be understood. You live to be in tune. And that tuning, it's where you find the life that was waiting for you all along. The life that doesn't demand your exhaustion. The life that doesn't ask you to disappear. The life that doesn't test your worth at every turn. It asks only one thing, that you stop forcing what's not meant, that you stop grasping, that you stop shaping your truth into something easier to digest for people who've never once tried to taste your pain. Because when you stop trying to be digestible, you finally become whole. And wholeness isn't loud. It's luminous. It doesn't seek the spotlight. It becomes a light. That's who you are now. Not the version addicted to struggle. Not the version obsessed with control. But the version who has finally come home to your body, to your peace, to your path, and most importantly, to yourself. And as you stand here fully returned, fully rooted, you no longer need to rush into the future or dig through the past to justify your presence. You simply are. And that are is enough. More than enough. It is sacred. It is sovereign. It is free. Free from the chains of forcing. Free from the exhaustion of pretending. Free from the quiet agony of living a life that fits someone else's narrative. Because now you move only when it feels right. You act only when it's rooted in clarity. You speak only when your voice serves truth, not your image. You love from fullness, not fear. You create from overflow, not obligation. You trust, not because you have the answers, but because you've stopped resisting the questions. And the beauty of this is that you no longer wait for peace to arrive on the other side of success, achievement, approval. You realize it was here all along, buried under all that forcing, waiting in the quiet, resting in the stillness, breathing beneath the noise. And now that you've stopped clenching, stopped chasing, stopped twisting yourself into shapes just to be enough, you see clearly. The exhaustion was never about doing too much. It was about doing too little of what was real. And the moment you return to what is real, to what is meant, to what calls you, not just calls on you, you don't just feel less tired. You feel alive. You feel light. You feel undeniably you. Not performance. No pretense. Just presence. And presence, that's where everything sacred begins. So don't forget this. You were never tired because you were weak. You were tired because you were forcing what was never meant. And now that you've let go, you are home. You are whole. You are finally free.